what did you kind of learn in those early days of, like, for example, diameters that you absolutely would not do, of course, today anymore? Maybe type of implants. What are you looking for in an implant? And then, of course, where you switched over to grafting, are we looking at bone grafting? Are we looking at soft tissue grafting? Or are we looking at maybe a combination of both? So maybe give us kind of a little perspective on that, and that would be helpful.
So basically, implant diameter-wise, I mean, I need to reference you two publications. First of all, 1998, that's the first publication on immediate tooth replacement. I mentioned to you, Peter Worley. The second reference I want to reference you is in 2001. The journal is Compendium. The authors is, first author is David Garber, then Maurice and Henry Salama. So both articles at that time when they talk about immediate tooth replacement and implant diameter, first of all, Peter Worley, he mentioned that your implant should fill the socket. Not only that, he mentioned that if the socket is bigger than the implant, then your implant should be pushed buccally, contacting the buccal plate to hold the buccal plate. Then you look at Salama, David Garber and Salama brothers in 2001, the Atlanta team, when they published an article, likewise, they say that in the most ideal situation, an implant should fill the socket. Now, of course, we as clinicians, we follow a lot of those rules, and I'm sure, I don't know whether you have experienced that. Now I look back of those cases. I mean, I hope those patients won't come back and look for me. They're nightmares. No bone, no tissue, crazy situation. So then we learn. Then, later on, like almost 7, 8 years later, I mean, my dear friend John Coyce and I, and you are also one of the first people. I remember your article when you were back in UCLA Times. You mentioned, I think your group and my group with John Coyce were the first one who mentioned smaller diameter implant actually is the key. Okay, why? Because we realize the buccal bone is going to remodel. We all learned about the bundle bone from Jan Lindy's, those beagle dog studies. But the reality is this: we know every time when we extract the tooth from socket, after we put implant in there, if we do not leave a gap between the implant and the buccal bone, and we know that that buccal bone, because of lack of the support from the tooth and the bundle bone, is going to remodel. And if we don't leave a gap, the implant is going to be exposed. So going back to the gap and graft management, the second question you asked, I mean, when the purpose for me to leave a gap and a smaller diameter implant, just like you say in your literature, is to actually to compensate for that inherent remodeling of that buccal complex. And how much does it remodel? Of course, different patients remodel differently, but in general, based on the literature that we all have, the upper limit is probably 1.5 millimeters. That means if you extract the tooth, you put bone graft in the gap, after the remodeling, the upper limit is probably a little bit 1.5. Therefore, if you leave a gap up there, less than 1.5 to 2 more meters, you could risk exposing that implant. Now, in terms of graft material-wise, and I have my opinions. You are the expert in GPR, in bone. I mean, you are the godfather of regeneration. You know that. I mean, I will tell you that for me, when I put bone graft material in the gap, I basically, for me, I like to prefer to give a combination of 50% of Xenograft and Allograft. Now, of course, in the United States, we are allowed to use Allograft. A lot of countries cannot use Allograft or Xenograft. So if that situation, if you can maybe scrape some autogenous bone and do a mixture, maybe that works best. We did a study. We compare the data on when you use Xenograft and Allograft on the gap. Allograft tends to retract a little bit more than Xenograft. And so I prefer to have some Xenograft component in it. I mean, what do you do? Sasha, again, you are very also experienced. What graft material do you use? If you leave a gap, what size gap do you usually prefer to leave?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Thank you, Joe. Like for me, it's been always like a very important part that, as you said, the implant diameter is limited. So like usually my implant diameters in the anterior maxilla is maybe 3.5, 3.75. It will pretty much never go over that 4.0. I mean, really like that's seldom. So I create a gap like you suggested of about 1.5 millimeters, plus or minus. And then, of course, I make sure that I have the buccal plate intact. The buccal bone has to be intact to me within about a 3 millimeter apical distance from the gingival margin. So then I know that basically that whole facial plate is intact. Now that gap, I then fill normally if the full buccal plate is intact with xenograft only. And this is sufficient for me in like now 20 plus years because I make sure, and that's my inclusion criteria for immediate tooth replacement, that buccal bone is intact. Because I see that buccal bone almost like a biological, bioactive membrane because it has the periosteum coming in from the facial. It has bone, which of course is thin, but it's still there. And then the xenograft just preserves the whole area. You mentioned for a moment, like, the autogenous, that I do as well. I usually do that more like in patients maybe who have like a more missing bone or like the bones are really thin. Or of course, when I switch over to GBR completely, that's when I start to add autogenous bone. So what does that mean for me? I take immediate tooth replacement out of the context if I'm missing buccal bone. And that's when I switch over to a GBR where we start to use xenograft and autograft.
Now that's a great point, Sasha. I mean, that concept for me, I differs from you a little bit. Okay, I differ from you a little bit because based on the last maybe 13, 14 years of research, we noticed that the buccal plate, I mean, ideally is to have the buccal plate intact when we do immediate implant placement. But the last 15 years of research seems to suggest to us, if we put implant placement in a socket in which the buccal bone is somewhat compromised, all right? And let me define what I mean by compromise. So if you look at the distal width of the tooth and how wide is that defect, all right? We noticed that as long as the defect, although it's present, it doesn't encompasses the interbone of the interproximal teeth, the adjacent teeth. If we place implant in and we can get good stability, and occlusally, the implants are placed within the defect, we notice by doing GPI and soft tissue graft, we actually have excellent tissue aesthetics. In fact, the Dennis Harnell group also published a similar article, also acetate, similar concepts there. And then my friend, and you may know her, she's a wonderful periodontist, Dr. Choi in Malaysia, and she's also started showing some data on that. So I think ideally for beginners, I agree with you, buccal plate will be intact, but after you have done a bunch of cases, you start getting provision on it, we can venture out a little bit now. Just with smaller defects, not like big buccal bone defects, but small defects, we can still get very efficient results.